Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today it's time to have a look at another devblog, but this one is actually for a crafting event which is going to be coming out in April. So this is an early warning sign, I suppose, to let you guys know that maybe next week or the week after we're going to be having a crafting event which is going to be similar to some of the ones we've had in the past. This devblog is going over the SU-76D. It's going to be a rank 2 premium for the USSR and also, of course, a self-propelled gun. It's definitely an interesting machine, quite similar to some that we've already seen in game with limited use, but we'll have to see how this one does. Anyway, let's get into the history of this machine. And also a note, I am full of cold right now, so I apologize if I sound a little bit odd. That's basically why I'm bunged up. So in the middle of World War II, a bunch of different industrial enterprises started working on new weapons for the Soviet Union. One of these was the Gorky automobile plant, which was a bunch of designers proposed a light tank destroyer designed with a closed cabin and also a diesel engine. Generally, the idea for a machine like this was to try and use some of the chassis which were becoming outdated, such as the T-60, the T-70, and so on, and try and give them a new lease of life. So in one of the iterations of the design, the project turned to a vehicle with a low silhouette and an inclined arrangement of armor plates. It was assumed that the vehicle would be armed with a 76 or 57mm, and it was planned to install this on a modified hull carriage of the T-70 light tank for the chassis of the vehicle. The issue that it had, though, was the actual power plant itself. There were two options that they could go for. They could either go for the American-built GMC-71 diesel engines, which, of course, you know, they had quite a lot because of the Lend-Lease program that they were a part of with America, or they could start production on a domestic engine, which would be similar to the GMC-71. They decided to go for the domestic engine in the end. Now, the 76mm, which they decided to pick, which is very similar, or if not the same, as the one which is on the SU-76, found that it was no longer good enough by the time this thing was created to actually destroy the latest models of German armored vehicles. What you have to understand is these vehicles came around in mid to late war, 1943 to 1944, and at that point, Tigers, Panthers, and also stuff like Ferdinands were rolling around the place, which of course meant that this 76mm was quite obsolete against them. So therefore, that was a real issue for the design. There was also another real issue with the design. Because they decided to go with this domestic engine, they had a ton of problems fine-tuning it, so therefore it would actually work properly. And that meant that there was a closure of the SU-76D, and obviously D actually stood for diesel on the project. So it was built, it was tested, but it never really got anywhere, just because, like a lot of designs, it never actually got to the battlefield when it would have been required. It got there too late. And another vehicle, which we already have in game, I love it how they put this in the history section. I'm going to read it verbatim for you. The second vehicle from this designer team, the SU-57B SPG, is already known by War Thunder tankers and has proven itself quite well in battles. We decided to add her older sister to the game. I mean, I'm very glad they've added the SU-76D, but to call the SU-57B a vehicle that has proven itself quite well in battles is hilarious. I think this vehicle in itself is probably the one that has changed its BR the most when it comes to going down in BR out of all vehicles in the game. It is definitely not very combat effective and has been constantly going down in BR over and over and over again. Oh, the SU-57B, what a shame. What a shame of a vehicle. So the SU-76D is going to be a premium low-rank tank destroyer designed for the new crafting event, which is coming to War Thunder very soon. Now, generally in these crafting events, you do get 4 vehicles in total. Normally, you get something like 2 ground vehicles, 1 naval and 1 air. That seems to be the standard, which at least we got last year with the space race and also the strategist event. So my guess is we're going to get this, and then we're going to get a high-ranking probably event vehicle which won't have premium status, very similar to the Object 279 and the Macarva Mark 3D that we got last year in their respective events. When it comes to the SU-76D, I'm not too hopeful about this. The only real use for this thing is its premium status. As a person who has spaded out the SU-57B, I can tell you that playing these types of vehicles is incredibly frustrating in War Thunder. They lack a lot of things. They lack a lot of horizontal traverse, they lack a lot of gun depression and gun elevation, because the idea of them is that you have created the lowest silhouette possible to be able to not get shot. But when you actually look at these vehicles, they are actually quite high profile compared to a lot of other vehicles that we have in game. And also, because their armor is not very thin at the front, it's really easy to be able to penetrate through it. And with even at low tiers where these things find themselves, you do have a lot of vehicles with either autocannons or stabilizers, e.g. the Stuarts or some of the Italian vehicles that roam around, or even the Shermans if you're unlucky enough to be able to face them. Then what generally happens is you will just get eaten. The SU-57B, I hope, is a good show of that by the fact that it continuously goes down. That thing started at 4.3, by the way, that machine. It started at the same BR as the T-3457, and I think it's in the 2s right now, or it's at something like 3.0, just showing how just having a good gun doesn't help you. You know, you need a few other factors. And with this machine having the 76mm F-34 cannon, which you can find on the early versions of the T-34, it will have a good punch to it. You know, it will have a gun which, if it penetrates, will kill targets over and over and over again. It will be able to deal with early Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs. It will struggle slightly against Shermans unless you shoot them in certain areas, and it will do well against stuff like Cromwell's and probably Churchill's, depending on the rounds that it gets. You know, the gun is not going to be the issue. The issue is everything else on this machine. The lack of armor, the no turret, the fact that the speed is quite slow, the fact that it's going to really struggle to traverse. At least this thing is a premium vehicle, so therefore you don't have to modify it out, and therefore you don't have to deal with not having that engine upgrade, which makes it as slow as a potato. As an event vehicle, this one is kind of at least interesting. You know, it's something different, it's slightly wacky, and generally for me, when it comes to event vehicles, what I want them to be is something which is different, not something which is meta-defining and not something which can take over the game. Because then in 2 or 3 years' time, when that vehicle is still around but only a unique few have it compared to the overall community, it can become a bit of a problem, because it basically means that the meta vehicles are limited to very specific people. This is why stuff like the FJ4B with its bullpups was a little bit of an issue back in the day, even though they were just testing the mechanic and then expanded it to other nations, which then made it be okay. The SU-76D is not really breaking any new ground. It's not really testing any new mechanics or anything like that. It's very similar to other machines that we've seen in game. We know how this thing is going to perform just basically looking at it, but it is something which is unique. It is something which is, you know, a premium. It is something which is nice to see. It is kind of sad that it is for the Soviets. One thing that I've talked about quite a lot is I thought on the last event they did really well, where they made the lower tier premiums. They made them minor nation vehicles, therefore trying to introduce people to the minor nations to have a go with them. I thought that was really cool. Unfortunately, that's not the case here. We have another major nation Soviet vehicle, which is, completely fine, but it would be nice if it was the other way around. Maybe we're going to get a high tier or a high ranking event vehicle for one of the minor nations. That would be an incredible surprise, but not unprecedented, with stuff like the Orbital HVG existing in the game. And hopefully, one of the big things when it comes to this crafting event, I will once again stress this, the biggest issue I have with the crafting events in general is you are not able to get all of these vehicles. And this was a problem that we saw last year with all the crafting events, and I am hoping that this year this is not an issue. I'm hoping for this crafting event you will be able to sit down and be able to get all of these vehicles just by playing the game. That would be my one wish when it comes to these crafting events. No matter how hard it is, it still has to be possible, which is something we didn't see at all last year in any of the crafting events. Overall, I'm happy to see this. We'll have to see the future news when it comes to the other event vehicles that will be on offer. I'm sure there'll be a high-tier event vehicle and then a bunch of other mid-tier premiums, and therefore people can use them to either grind, get some SL, or of course, get some high-tier action. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Hosest Kishol, Hans, Bareen, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.